This production is brought to you by Ancient Origins, reconstructing the story of humanity's past, and the YouTube channel, The Study of Antiquity and the Middle Ages. First Kingdoms. An extract from Ancient Syria, A 3,000-Year History by Trevor Bryce. Narrated by D.W. Draffin. Spectacular things were happening in Mesopotamia in the period we call the Early Bronze Age, particularly in the southern part of it, commonly called Babylonia. It was here that the wealthy, sophisticated Sumerian civilization developed, its growth and prosperity greatly spurred by the invention of writing. A magnificent assortment of beautifully wrought items, like those unearthed from the so-called royal tombs of Ur, and now on display in the British Museum, testifies to the high level of craftsmanship of the Sumerian civilization at its zenith. In the wake of the Sumerian Early Dynastic period, 2900 to 2334 BCE, there arose in southern Mesopotamia the first great empire in Near Eastern history, the Akkadian Empire, 2334 to 2193 BCE, founded by Sargon, which at its peak extended through the whole of Mesopotamia and northwestwards into southeastern Anatolia. Early Bronze Age Mesopotamia's archaeological remains and prolific tablet finds provided rich and exciting fields of investigation for archaeologists, historians, and linguists alike. But across the Euphrates, in Syria, the picture was much bleaker, so it seemed, if you happened to be any of these. Up until the 1960s, third millennium Syria was generally thought of as no more than an illiterate backwater of small communities far removed from the great developments of civilization occurring in Mesopotamia and Egypt. But there must have been more to it than this, and indeed it was quite possible that the numerous unexplored mounds, tells, throughout the region did include remains of settlements of various kinds contemporary with the first great civilizations of Mesopotamia. But attention was too much focused on other regions that offered surer prospects of significant finds in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Palestine. Nonetheless, an Italian archaeologist, Paolo Mattiei, believed that Syria should not be entirely neglected, and he selected a site now called Tel Mardik in northern Syria, some 60 kilometers, 37 miles, southwest of Aleppo, for further investigation. The Secrets of Ebla. Potsherds found scattered over its surface gave an indication of its early date, and the unusually large dimensions of the tell which marked the site persuaded Professor Mattiei that it was worth a closer look. The upshot of this was that in 1964, he led the first of what were to be many campaigns at Tel Mardik as head of the Italian archaeological expedition of the University La Sapienza of Rome. It soon became evident that there was in fact a major settlement on the site at the time of Syria's so-called backwater period, but it took 4 years before the site could actually be identified. That happened in 1968 when part of a statue was found, with an inscription. The statue was dedicated to the goddess Ishtar by a man called Ibit-Lim, king of Ebla. So, Tel Mardik was in fact the ancient city of Ebla, a city already known to us from a wide range of texts. The earliest of them record the conquest of Ebla by Akkadian kings Sargon and his grandson Naram-Sin, and the city appears later in economic texts of the Ur-III Empire, i.e. the empire of the Third Dynasty of Ur, 2112 to 2004 BCE. These written records clearly established Ebla's existence as early as the 24th century BCE. Its subsequent existence after the Ur-III Empire is attested in texts from Alala, in northern Syria, dating to the 17th and 15th centuries BCE, and in the latter century it appears in the list of Syro-Palestinian conquests of the pharaoh Thutmosis III. So the site of Ebla had been discovered, and information about it was available from a range of external sources. But could Ebla also speak for itself? The answer to that question came in 1974, as Mathieu and his team worked patiently through the site's layers. Up till then, Ebla had attracted little interest outside the world of Near Eastern archaeology, and indeed relatively muted interest within it. The 1974 excavations dramatically changed all that. Already the year before, Mathieu's team, while excavating on the western slope of the Acropolis, came upon signs of a major building complex just below the mound's surface. The full extent and significance of this complex became clear in the 1974 excavations. It was a large, sprawling structure, whose walls in parts still reached a height of 7 meters, built around two sides of a large open area now called the Court of Audience, with a raised dais made of mud brick against its north wall. Was this the base of a royal throne? There was no doubt that the building was a royal palace. It is now called, rather prosaically, Palace G, and in archaeological terms, it belongs to what is called the Marduk, or Ebla, 2B1 period. In itself, this vast, multi-chambered complex was an important archaeological discovery, the earliest structure of its kind found anywhere in Syria, clearly distinguishing Ebla as a major regional center. But the most spectacular aspect of the find was a massive collection of thousands of clay tablets, often in fragments, inscribed with the cuneiform script and located in various rooms of the palace. Above all else, the tablet finds, excavated between 1974 and 1976, there have been only occasional discoveries since, brought Ebla to world attention. Dating as they do to the 24th century, they provide us with early evidence for writing in Syria. Particularly interesting is the fact that many of them are written in a local Semitic language, now dubbed Eblaite, and are thus the oldest significant evidence we have for any Semitic language in written form. There are also a number of Sumerian texts, including a hymn, and some lexical lists with Eblaite and Sumerian equivalents, described as the most ancient dictionaries known. The actual contents of the great majority of the tablets are fairly mundane. Apart from the few literary texts, hymns, etc., and lexical texts, they are very largely administrative documents, arranged in a number of different archives to do with the administration of Ebla and the surrounding region. They indicate the existence of an enormous, royal, highly centralized bureaucracy staffed by numerous officials and a broader workforce of artisans and laborers, all documented in the palace records along with the food rations for their sustenance. That much of the wealth of Ebla was agriculturally based is reflected in the palace records, which indicate the large flocks of sheep owned by the king, and the thriving textile industry associated with wool production. The tablets tell us of the distribution of these products, both to local officials within the Ebla region and to important foreigners. Mundane though they may be, we learn much from the tablets about the highly efficient organization of the Eblaite state and its strict administrative and social hierarchy. But the tablets are also important more broadly for what they tell us about social, political, and economic conditions in northern Syria in the mid-3rd millennium, that is to say in the middle of the early Bronze Age, and the pattern of city-states in the region at this time, with king, royal officials, and elders at the top of the hierarchy. A large assortment of economic, administrative, legal, lexical, literary, diplomatic, and epistolary texts provide valuable insights into the administration, daily life, and culture of Ebla, and its relations with its surrounding region during this phase of its existence, including its competition with Mari on the Middle Euphrates, to which we shall return. A number of other finds in Palace G provide further evidence of the richness of this phase of Ebla's history. Contacts with Egypt are indicated by fragments of alabaster and diorite vessels from the land of the Nile, and large quantities of lapis lazuli indicate trading links as far afield as Afghanistan. The high level of Eblaite craftsmanship in this period is reflected in a human-headed bull figurine of steatite and gold foil attached to a wooden core, and limestone inlays applied to wooden panels used for wall decoration. Fine works, fashioned in gold, lapis lazuli, and ivory, found in the palace are Babylonian in origin, or inspiration. More generally, there is no doubt that the development of Ebla as a politically, commercially, and culturally sophisticated center owed much to its strong cultural links with a number of contemporary cities of Babylonia. From both written and archaeological sources, we can build up a picture of Ebla as the most politically and commercially powerful kingdom of northern Syria in the early Bronze Age. Archaeologically, it is extremely important for our understanding of Syria's urban and commercial development in this period. By then, Syria contained a complex of city-states, each ruled by a king, whose relations with the rulers of Ebla are recorded in the Palace G archives. The territory over which Ebla held sway was clearly a substantial one, as it needed to be, given the region's relatively low rainfall, and the necessity of having a large area to graze the flocks that produced abundant quantities of wool for a flourishing textile industry. Clearly, too, Ebla's wealth and importance derived from its centrality with an international trading network, with links with southern Syria, central Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and regions further to the east. For a brief time, Ebla was a tributary of Mari, but it regained its independence after about 15 years and became Mari's chief political and commercial rival. This we learn from the kingdom's archives, which tells us of 3 kings who ruled Ebla during the 3-generation period covered by the tablets: Igrish-Halab, Irkab-Damu, and Ishar-Damu. But there were many more Eblaite kings. An offering list found in the archives gives us the names of 10 of them, of whom Ishar-Damu was the last. There were more names still. An augmented version of the offering list came to light in Mari's archives, and this version of it names no fewer than 26 Eblaite kings. This tells us that the royal dynasty at Ebla, and hence the royal city itself, extended back at least 3 centuries before the peak of its power in the 24th century. That is to say, the origins of dynasty and city date back at least to the 27th century BCE. 24th to 21st centuries BCE. The end of this great phase of Ebla's existence was due to its destruction by an Akkadian king, almost certainly Sargon, though Sargon's grandson Naram-Sin claimed responsibility. It may well be that one or other of these rulers believed that the kingdom was getting too powerful, to the point where it threatened Akkadian territorial ambitions west of the Euphrates, or at least refused to cooperate with the Akkadians in their western enterprises. But Ebla's lifespan was far from at an end. It had a first new lease of life when a modest new settlement, designated Marduk II-B2, was built on the northern part of the site following the Akkadian destruction. The most significant building of this phase, now called the Archaic Palace, was probably the residence of a new or revived line of local kings, possibly collaborators if not subordinates of the rulers of the Ur-III Empire, successor to the Akkadian Empire. But the new city was short-lived. It too was destroyed, about 2000, around the time the Ur-III Empire was finished off, and perhaps by the same agents. Ebla would rise again. As we shall see, it was to have at least one more regeneration before its final decline and abandonment. The Amorites. At this point we should say something about the Amorites, who will figure prominently in one way or another through much of the next part of our story. They are probably best known today as one of the peoples of the Old Testament, where they are listed in the Table of Nations amongst the tribal groups occupying parts of Canaan whom God ordered the Israelites to destroy. However, in the cities of the nation the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, do not leave anything alive that breathes. Completely destroy them, the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 16 and 17. We shall come back to other members in this list. Speakers of a northwest Semitic language, the Amorites consisted originally of a number of nomadic groups who inhabited parts of Syria and Palestine. By the 24th century, some of them had moved to Ebla and settled there, as we know from Amorite names in the city's archives. No doubt the secure, prosperous, and culturally sophisticated environment which Ebla offered, as did places further south like Katna and Hamath, which probably also had Amorite populations at this time, were inducement enough for the traditional pastoralists to exchange their nomadic lifestyle for a more settled urban one. But as their tribal cousins were settling into the comforts and security of a Syro-Palestinian urban existence, other Amorite groups who maintained their traditional lifestyle began spreading eastwards into southern Mesopotamia. Perhaps drought conditions forced them to seek new pasture lands for their flocks and herds across the Euphrates. As their numbers east of the river grew, so did the threat they posed to the kingdoms and city-states of their new homeland. Amorites now show up in Sumerian texts under the name Mar-Tu, meaning west, that is to say they came from the west, and the references to them are distinctly hostile. A Sumerian literary composition speaks of them as boorish, rootless, uncultured savages. The Mar-Tu, who know no grain, no house nor town, the boors of the mountains, the Mar-Tu, who digs up truffles, who does not bend his knees to cultivate the land, who eats raw meat, who has no house during his lifetime, who is not buried after his death. What the relationship is between the Amorites referred to here and those attested in the Eblaite texts of the same period is unclear. In any case, the Akkadian kings Sargon and Naram-Sin became involved in conflicts with the intruders. Naram-Sin finally defeated them when he quashed the Great Revolt, a widespread uprising of his subject cities, at a place called the Mountain of the Land Mar-Tu, Basar, modern Jebel Bishri. But the Amorite menace persisted. After the fall of the Akkadian Empire, Amorite groups consistently pressed upon territories claimed by the new overlords of Babylonia, the kings of the Ur-III dynasty. In an attempt to keep their lands free of the Amorites, the kings built a chain of fortifications or watchtowers across northern Babylonia. Their efforts failed, but the Ur-III Empire was soon to end anyway. Around 2004 BCE it was destroyed, not as it happened by the Amorites, but by invaders from southwestern Iran called the Elamites. The situation was ripe for exploitation. Amorite chieftains moved quickly to fill the power vacuum in the region left by the Elamite victory, setting themselves up as rulers of a number of Babylonian cities formerly subject to the Akkadian and Ur-III kings, including Larsa, Babylon, Kish, Marad, and Sippar. Discarding their ancestral nomadic origins, the Amorites had by now completely assimilated to urban society.
Ancient Origins specializes in reconstructing the story of humanity's past. And honestly, for those of you who love anything ancient, mysterious, and the unexplained, it's the best resource online for you, providing a variety of content. But more importantly, it's helping us understand the subjects that we all love. From the fringe to the mainstream, you get the best of everything. But if you want access to even greater content, I highly suggest you becoming a premium member to Ancient Origins. And for those of you who may ask, okay, why? I have an answer for you. One, it is a treasure trove of information. It gives you even more access to the subjects that you love, from ebooks, webinars, expeditions, even more articles. But in some cases, you get to talk to the experts themselves. And by being a subscriber to Ancient Origins, you are continuing to help them make history matter. Ancient Origins literally has something for everyone. So, before we get to the presentation, check out the links in the video description below. I'm going to provide you with a variety of references to Ancient Origins, from their Facebook page and other social media outlets to the very heart of the Ancient Origins website itself, to help people like me and you better understand the subjects of history, mystery, and the unexplained that we all love.